Matter of fact, we finished 21 because you talked
Oh,
about
yeah.
crossing the Euphrates.
Okay, all right. I knew somewhere in there we. All right, we'll figure it out eventually. Yeah. All right. Okay, well, we'll pick up here verse 22 then. In 21, it tells us that Jacob had crossed the Euphrates River. Now, keep in mind, he's had about 3 days head start on Laban. And from Haran to the Euphrates River, if he went the most direct route, would have been probably about 30 or 40 miles. So at this point, he's covering from there to the Euphrates at least 10 to 15 miles a day. But as we continue reading, we'll find that there's a good possibility that he may have been covering about 30 miles a day. And if that's true, when you're considering he's driving a bunch of flocks and got wives and kids on camels, that's actually making pretty good time. Way faster than what you would anticipate. Now, before we get to that point, let me just mention this one thing. I did read one commentator that claimed that the times that are given here could have been just round figures simply because it sounded good. I reject that. I mean, I know you're going to probably come across, if you do any studying on this, come across commentators that will say that, but I don't see any reason not to take what Moses has given us as accurate information, because I look at it from this perspective. This isn't merely an oral history that was handed down, because as Moses wrote this, where did he get his information?
God.
Yep, and I don't think God just rounds off things to exaggerate. So anyway, verse 22, it says, when it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, then he took his kinsman with him and pursued him a distance of 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the hill country of Gilead. Now, let's consider this. Now, first off, notice Laban didn't just leave with himself and maybe his boys. When it says he took his kinsmen, actually the original Hebrew says he took his brothers with him. Well, in this context, the Hebrew term brothers basically means family in general. Now, if he was there shearing his sheep and he's gotten word 3 days later that Jacob has absconded with all the flocks, his daughters, and his grandkids, and then he takes off after them, he's probably going with not just him and his boys, but probably servants and as many others as he can get. Now, if that's the case, what does that tell you is in Laban's mind?
War again.
Yeah, he isn't going just to say goodbye. He's going to get his flock back, or what he thinks is his flock, and if necessary, dispense with Jacob if it comes to that. Now, notice it says, pursued him for 7 days' journey. Now, he already had a 3-day head start. So by the time this is over with, they've gone, they being Jacob and his wives, 10 days. Now, if you look on a map, from Haran to the hill country of Gilead is about 300 miles to the southwest. They were making good time here. In 300 miles in 10 days, they're covering 30 miles a day. Now, if you got a bunch of kids, wives on camels, plus you're driving livestock that have got to be fed and watered, what does that tell you that is in Jacob's mind?
Get out of there fast.
Yep. He's running for his life at this point because
Moving 14 hours a day to keep that pace up.
He's
Uh-huh.
pushing those sheep pretty hard.
yeah, well, you figured probably the sheep are doing their grazing in the late afternoon, in the evenings. Now, what prompted Jacob at this particular time to make a run for it?
Laban was busy shearing.
Well, yeah.
He was
Lord
kind
told
of,
him. Shearing sheep.
he was kind of putting
Lord told him, go.
the fraud on Laban.
back
about-
to your-
Okay. That's the issue. Yes, Laban was shearing sheep. The time may have been optimum, but who told Jacob, run? God did.
God did.
Now, if God, well, I shouldn't say it, this is sort of a conditional if, not as if, well, God may know and God, that's not what I mean at all. I'm just saying conditionally that if God said this, we can assume that God knows all the other conditions that are involved in this. And if Jacob's got to make as much distance as he can, because we've got to keep those sheep fed and watered, and running them 30 miles a day is pretty hard on a herd of sheep and goats. What time of the month do you think it probably was?
That'd be cool out.
Well, I'm betting it was probably just before and after the full moon, because why would that have been important for the sheep?
Light.
They could graze at night. Now, I don't know that, but I know we serve a God that tends to know what he's doing. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir. Wholeheartedly.
Because let's face it, you just mentioned covering 30 miles a day with a flock and herd of sheep like this, that is pushing them pretty hard. In fact, it would be pushing any of us to cover 30 miles a day, especially if any of them are on foot.
They used to figure a day's ride on a horse is 15 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, you can push a horse till it drops, but that was just sort of an average. What did you say?
Well, they're also on camel. Well, those that have animals have got camels, which also tells us what about their ability to travel. Those camels don't have to be watered as much as a horse,
Well,
but
I
the
just
sheep do.
gave- Yeah, I just gave that as an example.
Yeah. Well, no, I know.
I don't know if they had horses in them.
Horses certainly were available, but I don't think the average person back then in that part of the world had access to that many. All right. So he got 10 days head start, and again, as I mentioned, from Haran to the hill country of Gilead, about 300 miles. So he's covering 30 miles a day, and it took Laban and his bunch 7 days to catch up with him.
He's not driving a flock.
He's not driving a flock. He's
Doesn't have
on,
women and children.
yeah, no women and children. But the point is, for him to cover that same distance in 7 days, he was averaging about 42 to 43 miles a day. He's pushing it because he wants to catch up with them. Now, how would he have known exactly where to go? I mean, he knows that Jacob's from Canaan, but
Follow the trail.
yeah, if they're pushing flocks, they're leaving a trail behind. All right, verse 24. And God came to Laban the Aramean. Now, notice here, the scripture's making it a point that Laban is an Aramean.
Mentioned it further back as well. Laban
Uh-huh.
and Aramean.
Now, certainly, Jacob is of the same bloodline. I mean, ethnically, Jacob is an Aramean. But it doesn't refer to Jacob as an Aramean at this point. It refers to Laban as an Aramean. Because one of the things that we're going to see is it's at this point in history that we see a very distinct separation. That even though both are from the same bloodlines, they're both ethnically identical, we're going to see from this generation forward, you've got a distinction now between the Arameans and the Hebrews.
My Bible says says that Laban was a Syrian.
Same thing.
Same thing?
The Arameans lived in the area of northern Syria and southern, what is now southern Turkey. Syria would be the geographical location. Aramean would be the ethnic issue. So it's just a matter of interpretation. But I think for our purposes here, it's more important to look at the ethnicity than it is just the location they lived at. But you see, from this point on, there becomes a distinction between the Hebrews and the Arameans at this point. And also, one of the things you're going to see later on, let's look at the issue of language. Would they have spoken the same language? I mean, they were all family. Mm-hmm. They came from the same, you're only talking about 2 or 3 generations. They're not going to be, unless they had been displaced and taken to a completely different, country, and their kids grew up, under the influence of some other ethnicity or country, they'd speak the same language. But we're going to see at this point that in these 3 generations, they've been gone long enough that although they can speak the same language, and we know that's the case because when Jacob went there 20 years earlier, he'd never been there before in his life, and he strikes up a conversation with the servants around the well. So they clearly at one point spoke the same language.
Didn't Jesus at one point or another speak Aramaic?
You're thinking Aramaic. Aramean is sort of the, excuse me, a predecessor of Aramaic.
I can't speak either one of them, so it doesn't.
Well, to give you an illustration of a parallel, it's kind of the difference between Latin and Italian.
Okay.
If you speak fluent Italian, you probably could read Latin and at least stumble your way through it. But they're 2 different languages. So Aramaic, and the reason that the Hebrews at that point were speaking Aramaic was because they had just spent 70 plus years in captivity in Babylon, and Babylon is a few more 100 miles north of where these people are coming from here. All right, but anyway, Moses is beginning to make a distinction here, so that's the reason he points out that Laban is an Aramean. Okay, he said, God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream of the night and said to him, be careful that you do not speak to Jacob either good or bad.
What does that mean?
Okay, that's what I'm about to tell you.
Basically, that's telling him don't say anything at all.
That's exactly what it's saying.
Okay. That's what I was trying to make sure of.
God was telling Laban, essentially, if you catch up with Jacob, you better, God is telling him, leave him alone.
But he didn't.
But he goes ahead and talks to him anyway.
He does.
Okay.
In direct disobedience to what God had told him. So yeah, the phrase, don't say anything to him, good or bad, you're saying that kind of narrows it down. That's exactly what God is telling him. Said, you don't go talk to him at all. But he does it anyway. God could have easily just struck Laban down right there, but he doesn't. Said, and Laban caught up with Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country. Now, if he's pitched his tent, what does that tell you?
He's going to stay a while.
Once he got to the hill country of Gilead, he was 300 miles away and probably at this point assumed, well, he's back in the confines of Canaan, except for the fact that the hill country of Gilead is on the east side of the Jordan River. Canaan's on the west side of the river. We're going to see that's important because as he heads southward after this, we know the next chapter he encounters Esau, and all of this happens east of the Jordan River. But he's gotten far enough south that he figures he's generally back in the area that God is sending to. The fact that he has pitched a tent tells, at least tells me that he was planning on staying in this area for a little while. Probably did not realize that Laban was chasing him. Because you figured if you're You know, if you've walked or gone camelback for 300 miles, that would be the equivalent of basically going from where we are here to Atlanta. You'd think by the time you got that far, you're probably home free. He was wrong. Laban was after him.
Got sore feet.
What's that?
Probably got sore feet.
He might have. But it says Laban caught up with him in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen camped in the hill country of Gilead. Apparently, from the commentaries I read, that they apparently were camped opposite each other, or at least that's what it was believed. One on one hillside and one on the other. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done by deceiving me?" Actually, in the Hebrew, it's a Hebrew euphemism that says, "You stole my heart." But that's a euphemism in Hebrew that essentially means you tricked me or you deceived me. He said, "What have you done by deceiving me and carrying away my daughters like captives of the sword?"
Isn't that a bit of an exaggeration? Aren't they his wives?
They are.
Not to mention, he's been a little deceptive already. It's not like he's all innocent in this.
Laban's not innocent in the whole
And now you're
deceptive
starting to
game
see
either.
the issue. Laban's already been warned by God, you better leave him alone. And what does he do? He catches up with Jacob and confronts him and says, "You stole my daughters." Doesn't mention that, oh, by the way, I happen, they're your wives,
And you have every right to take them with
which
you.
you worked for.
Yeah.
But no, he doesn't mention that at all. Just says, "You stole my daughters." Which tells you what about Laban's heart?
It's hard.
Black heart.
I was just gonna say, I mean, if you look at it like the patriarchal organization that they had, I mean, Jacob came to Laban and then stayed with Laban. I mean, it's not like he was his son, but isn't the father the leader of the group up until he dies? So I'm saying that in his mind, I could see how he could say a little something like that.
Except for one problem. In the illustration that you're using there, as far as the patriarch, usually it was the patriarch on the male side.
Yeah, right, but I'm saying, but it was because Jacob came there,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't take his wives right away. I mean, normally they would, take their wives and then go to their father's place. But it's a little bit reversed, but I could see how it could
The
be.
point you're making is that Laban is the patriarch of that family, and that Jacob came and put himself under Laban, so that
Yeah.
Laban became his patriarch,
Yeah.
in essence. And that's how Laban sees things.
And that's a possibility.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But this also tells you that this may be among the reasons why later on, when God gives Moses the law, there's a provision in the law that says whenever, for whatever reason, whether it be because of indebtedness or because you're destitute or whatever, when you enslave yourself voluntarily to somebody else and you work for them, the Bible says that after, in the year of Jubilee, which
Every 7 years.
every 7 years, they must be released, regardless of what debt is owed. And Jacob
property-
worked 7 years for each daughter.
And property needs to be returned to its
Uh-huh.
owner.
But in this case, it wasn't just property, it was his wives. But yeah, he worked 7 years for each one. And now, as you mentioned, Laban's still confronting him, claiming that even though you worked for them and you legitimately bought his, my daughters, he's accusing him of stealing them. All right. Verse 27, it says, "Why did you flee secretly and deceive me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with joy and with songs, with timbrels and with lyre, and did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Now you have done foolishly." Now, notice that he refers to his grandsons as his sons. And it's not just, I realize that in this context, in Hebrew, to refer to your grandson as your son is not at all uncommon. But what is notable is, notice it's my sons, my daughters. You think Laban is really wanting to throw a party here?
Yeah.
Laban's the one
He's throwing a guilt trip on Jacob.
Oh, that's exactly what he's doing. He's using this as an excuse. Also, notice God has told him the night before that don't say anything one way or the other to Jacob, and yet what's he doing? He's basically putting Jacob on the defensive. I'm actually looking back on it. I'm shocked that God didn't strike him dead.
It's starting to come across like a veiled threat.
It's exactly what it is. And that's why, and Jacob realizes that's exactly what's going on, which explains the answer that Jacob gives him. And in fact, look what in verse 29, what Laban tells him. It is in my power to do you harm. In other words, I've got the ability to kill you right here. And let's consider this. If Jacob took off with nothing but his 4 wives, his kids, and the flock that he'd gotten, because we're not told at this point Jacob had any servants with him. I mean, he might have, but they're not mentioned if they are. Laban, on the other hand, has got what?
Kinsman.
He's got the whole brood with him. So Laban's basically telling him, I've got the ability to put you down right here on the spot. That's not just a veiled threat. It is a very obvious threat, which is again, quite the opposite of what God told him. He says, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to speak either good or bad to Jacob. So he even admits that God had spoken to him, but notice how he defines God.
Your father.
The God of your father.
He knows of God, but he doesn't worship him.
At this point, yeah, that's exactly what this is saying. Laban knows who this God is. He's been taught, because the family, maybe 2 or 3 generations before, apparently did worship this God. But by the time we get to Laban's, well, and what other example do we see of that in the Bible that we've studied so far? Well, Lot. Lot knew who the true God was, and God even apparently cut Lot some slack by rescuing him from Sodom. But what do we see happen between Lot and his daughters? He didn't teach them anything.
The effects of having lived in Sodom.
The effects of having lived in Sodom. So there is a precedent for this. Laban knew who the true God was, but by this point he's been contaminated by living amongst, other pagans. And so now he knows who Jacob worships, but it's the God of your father. The God of Isaac, in other words. And now, this is verse 30. And now you have indeed gone away because you long greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? All right, now let me explain this one. Laban's cutting him a little bit of slack here, saying, well, I can understand that you were homesick. You've been gone for 20 years. And by the way, if you're wondering where the 20 years, we're not told anywhere at this point how long he'd been gone. That actually comes later in this chapter. We know he'd been gone at least 14 years, but as far as the 6 years he served to breed the flocks, that comes later. But we do know he'd been gone 20 years altogether. But he says, why'd you steal my gods? Now he's actually tipped his hand theologically. Yes, he knows who the true God is, but this is the first indication that we have that Laban clearly has gotten himself involved in pagan worship. Because what he's asking, and the Hebrew word there is teraphim, which is an earth, not a goddess, but an earthly idol. They were, sometimes they were fertility gods, other times they were agricultural gods, that people believed that if they served or made sacrifices to these gods, that they'd have good crops or lots of kids. Now, let me mention, when these idols, don't think this huge idol. These idols were these little. They were the household gods, which means they were, they might not have been any bigger than this. Now, why these are important is for this reason. It's not just that Laban might have worshipped them, but in the culture of that region, the possession of those household gods indicated who was the heir to the family fortune. Which also tells you why Rachel may have stolen them. Because Laban, as possessor of these idols, that tells us that he was the elder son of his father and had inherited the next generation's stuff from his father. Now he's got him in his home with the expectation that one of his boys then would be, would he pass on these idols to them. That basically is the pagan version of the family blessing. And he would pass them along to them. Now, if Rachel understood that, which I'm sure she would have, might kind of now indicate to you why she stole them. It wasn't necessarily that Rachel wanted to worship these gods, but what had both Rachel and Leah just said a few days earlier to Jacob that prompted Jacob that it was time to run.
That he had squandered their inheritance.
He squandered their inheritance. We got nothing left here. And then when they find out, or Jacob tells them, well, by the way, God has told me we need to run. And they say, hey, whatever God's told you to do, let's do it. And so Rachel sneaks in. And by the way, in all this, Jacob is never told, and we don't have any indication at this point, Jacob had any clue that Rachel stole them. But Rachel, her motivation behind stealing them would have been that family inheritance. She knows that Laban has squandered all of what should have been hers. So what do you think she's basically doing to her dad at this point?
Taking what he's got left.
Yeah. She's basically giving him the, what was that, Lou? Exactly. And to her brothers, whichever one of the older brothers would have been would have received the inheritance.
Yep.
She is doing now to her dad what Jacob did to Esau. She is stealing the family blessing. All right. Why'd you steal my gods? And Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, lest you would take your daughters from me by force. Now notice he answers in the terms that Laban had mentioned. He doesn't say anything about taking my wives. He acknowledges that they are Laban's daughters, as he has just mentioned. The one...
He responds about the daughters too, and not about the idols.
He
doesn't know about them.
Well, we're getting to this. The one to whom your God, who has your gods, shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what is yours among my belongings and take it for yourself. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. He basically at this point has just told Laban, you find your stuff or your gods anywhere in my possessions, whoever has stolen them, well, that person's going to live or not going to live. So he's confident enough that none of his kids or his wives have these things, because he hadn't got a clue Rachel's, which we'll find here shortly, Rachel's literally sitting on them. All right, we're going to finish up here just shortly. Verse 33 says, Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two maids, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now, Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle, and she sat on them. And Laban felt through all the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, Let not my Lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the household idols. Now we'll stop there. She basically says, well, you know, it's my time, and I've got, what essentially she's telling is, I got the cramps and I can't get up. So, and,
My lady days.
yeah, what's that?
My lady days.
I'm having my lady days here, so I'm not going to get off the camel. But here's the key. Why does Laban not go over and search the camel?
She's unclean.
Because he'll be unclean.
That's it. Even though at this point the law of Moses had not been given, in their culture. So this, and the reason this is important is this tells us that a lot of the things that Moses, or I should say ultimately God, puts in the law of Moses actually had cultural precedent. So we see here one of the reasons why he isn't going anywhere near her when she says, hey, it's my time. He don't want to get anywhere near Rachel because he figures if I touch her, I'll be unclean. So whether Rachel was or wasn't, she knew exactly what to say to get him to back off. And bottom line is, she's sitting on him. Rachel, and what does this tell you about Rachel?
She's not giving those things back to daddy for nothing.
Well, I see it as two things. Number one, Rachel is no dummy. Rachel is smart. And the second thing is,
She's
as
got
you,
her father's genes.
yeah, she has not, as they say, that didn't fall far from the tree. She's as much of a conniving little trickster as her daddy is. So,
Again, the women are at work.
I know, you can't trust those women, huh?
Those out of hand.
But yeah, you know, for years, and I'm sure many of you, and I'll finish with this, I'm sure many of us, and I include myself in this as well, have thought that, well, you know, Rachel might have been a pagan until, you know, Jacob might have converted her later. So otherwise, why did she steal these household gods? Until I did some study on that, and I realized that those idols in their culture would always be, they were like the family heirloom that would be passed down to whoever was the primary heir in the next generation, and the possession of those indicated who the next family patriarch was. So by stealing those, whether she believed in worship, you know, idol worship or not, by stealing the idols, she was basically giving both her dad and her big brother the, meh, I'm stealing your inheritance.
Well,
So,
then what happens?
well,
I don't remember.
We don't get the rest of the story till next time.
yeah, till Sunday.
Same bad time, same bad.
Actually, I will tell you this much. After this particular episode, we don't hear much about the family idols after this, so we can only assume they probably were dumped or destroyed at some point, because she doesn't, you know, she doesn't hang on to them as far as we can tell. But Laban does not get them back.
So you think she did that out of spite?
I think that's exactly what she did.
It's all spite, yeah.
I think she did it out of pure spite.
Didn't she love Jacob in the beginning before
Yeah.
the dad gave
Spent a lot of
gave
time.
Leah to
Yeah.
him?
I think both of, by this point, not only are Rachel and Jacob, you know, do they love each other, but I think maybe by this point, the fact that Leah is so willing to go along with all this, that I think maybe after, you know, some several years of time, there may have been some emotional attachment between Leah and Jacob at this point as well. Otherwise, you know, how many times was Leah disappointed and just heartbroken that she figured her husband doesn't love her? Otherwise, if that had still been the case, when Jacob brought this up, she probably would have said, "The heck with you, I'm staying here.
Take the wife you love and go."
Take the wife you love and get out, you know, and leave." But she doesn't. She goes along with it, goes with him. That tells me that by this point, Leah was no longer the hated wife. She may not have been the favorite wife, But I think there was some attachment at this point.
Maybe on the other hand, she saw, well, if he doesn't love me, living with him's still better than staying at home with my Laban.
And that's probably true too. But let's face it, how many years can you live with someone and not develop some kind of, relationship? I mean,
Whether it's love or hate.
yeah, something.
Yeah, Laban had squandered her inheritance too.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of them essentially have stated at this point that, Daddy spent all our money, so we'll take what we can get and go. All right, anybody else?
Yeah, just this thing about Rachel stealing the family gods and the idols that those were. I'm just kind of wondering, and this is the first time that I can remember that idols have really been in Abraham's family. Abraham didn't, Isaac didn't, but Jacob is kind of introduced here. And I'm just wondering, it's one of those things that's the first time mentioned in the Bible, and does this like foreshadow the problem that Israel's gonna have with idols in the future?
Possibly, but also keep in mind that this particular instance still even then wouldn't necessarily indicate they were in Abraham's family, because remember, Laban was from a different branch of the family.
But this is just before Israel gets established as a nation, before
Mhm.
he gets his name changed from Jacob to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the beginning of Israel as a nation. Well, I consider it the point that Israel becomes a nation.
Right.
Okay, and just, it wasn't Abraham, but yet it was Abraham's family. I mean, his father.
Uh-huh.
All right, and I'm just wondering if that's just, you said that when Jacob left, it kind of foreshadowed his Israel's exodus from Egypt, being in a hurry and stuff
Mhm.
like that. Well, is this also foreshadowing the issues that Israel has as a nation with idols?
Possibly, but there's another parallel this could also be looking at as well. Because what did the Israelites do to the Egyptians on their way out the door?
They
Cleaned them out.
They plundered everything they could get. And what was Rachel's more probable motivation for stealing them? She was plundering Daddy's inheritance. So it may be, I'm not saying that your parallel does not hold, but it could also be that this is a parallel of plundering Egypt.
I think
She plundered
also,
Daddy.
The thing about the deities, they were also fertility gods.
Uh-huh.
And maybe Rachel still feeling a little inferior about not having too many kids.
And that's entirely possible. But all my point in that, looking at this and trying to really figure what is the lesson here, is after this part of the story, those idols, to my knowledge, are not really mentioned again after this, which makes me wonder if at some point after this, when Jacob does find out that she's got them, did they dump them, or what did happen to them?
Well, maybe she dumped them before she told him.
Because he did say, whoever I find with them is in trouble.
Like you said, it reminded more of Egypt too, because the chase. They left, and then the Egyptians caught up to them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what occurred here too.
There are a lot of parallels with Jacob's flight from Laban that go hand in hand with the flight from Egypt. And that is true as well. The Egyptians let them go for a while and then decided, hey, we need to go get them back.
But they came to a wet end at the Red Sea.
Yeah, might have been a bit soggy.
And God struck the Egyptians down. He didn't strike Laban down.
No, not at this point. Which, frankly, I'm kind of surprised.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? All right. Lou, want to lead us in prayer?
Oh, thank you.